So welcome back. So for this lecture, we're going to be picking up where we left off with our last lecture and talking about theories of personality. Okay. We're going to discuss what personality is. I mean, if I were to ask you what a personality is, what would be your definition? It could be from the book. It could be from anything. What would you say?
Is how we define ourselves.
How we define ourselves. Okay, okay. Well, let's get a couple of your opinions on what you think personality is. How about a couple of you? So, what defines us is one of them. Okay.
How a person acts.
Okay, so like a person's behavior, how they're acting overtly. Yeah. What else?
Their characteristics and qualities.
Okay, characteristics and qualities. All right. So what I would like to do to start off this class and get this kind of get our creative juices flowing today is I'm going to turn you loose into your groups, just random groups here, and have you discuss 5 qualities that you would describe yourself with. Okay, and be prepared to talk about them. So what are some of those qualities? What are some of those characteristics that define you as a person and kind of make up your personality? All right. Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So let's see, just give you a couple minutes here. 2 to 3 person per room, participants per room. So we'll have 6 rooms. All right. I'll break you all off now. These concepts here. So this chapter, like I said, it is theories of personality. I'm going to share my screen with you so you can follow along with what I am talking about. So theories of personalities. So like many things with psychology, we've talked about it constantly, that we have many theories for one single concept, and personality is no exception to that. So within our personalities, well, we know that we have personalities, right? We know that we have these characteristics, these qualities that make up who we are and how we define ourselves, and even how we react in certain situations. So that collectiveness of those characteristics and behaviors we call personalities, and we see that start to develop at a very young age until we get to whatever age you are now. This is a lifelong journey and a building of our personalities. And it can vary. It can vary from different persons to different persons. Really has it's a collective of our experiences, our thoughts, and even our temperament, which we'll talk about in a little bit. All right. So these are learning objectives. I'm not going to go through these. So one of the perspectives that we look at with psychology is called the psychodynamic perspective. Now, maybe you remember earlier on in the chapter, way back, I think in January, we talked about a gentleman called Sigmund Freud. And we're going to get to what his personality theory was a little bit later. But we realized, 1800s, that there is a thing that defines us, and each person's different. And we'd have grown to know that as personality, which is a unique and stable way people think, feel, and behave. Now, I use the word stable very loosely because we know some people that they might not be stable. They might have certain instability, in fact, with them, right? Emotional instability. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what we mean by stable is that if we see a personality trait in somebody that is 5 years old, we can kind of see that personality develop into the 20s, unless something major happens that individual changes their personality completely, usually because of some kind of life-altering event, or unfortunately even trauma can change a person's personality, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But anyway, those are things that might identify that. So theories of personality. So defining the term personality and identity, several traditional perspectives in the study of personality have kind of formed throughout the years, throughout the generations. So one of them are characteristics. You labeled some of those characteristics, trustworthiness, right? Loyalty. These are values of judgments of morality and ethics. And then we have temperament. Temperament is kind of the enduring characteristics that each person is born with. So many of you, I don't know if any of you have children, but many of you have seen children that have different temperaments, right? They could have the exact same two parents in the exact same household, but you can have multiple children with different temperaments. So we do know that it is very much a genetic biological function. And when we mean temperament, we mean people that are maybe more easily excitable to certain stimuli. So for example, if we heard a siren go by, we could see one baby panic and cry and freak out, kind of, right? That wouldn't be a pleasant experience for them, and they don't make it a pleasant experience for you until you remove them from that situation or make it stop. But for some kids, they might be inquisitive to something like that, right? It may not stir their emotions to the point where they're freaking out about it. They're actually curious. So we see that in temperament. We see children that have high anxiety through young age usually have some kind of anxiety through their adolescent and adulthood ages. And likewise, children, infants that tend to be a little bit more calm and display positive characteristics tend to see, oops, sorry. Broadcasting. Stop due to you have stops. I apologize. Okay. You can all see my slides, right? I'm just making sure we're all on the same page here.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Just making sure. Trying this new technology. All right. So the four traditional perspectives that we're going to cover in the book are psychodynamic, behavioral, humanistic, and trait theory. Okay, and we're going to go through each one of these. Hopefully going to get through psychodynamic and behavioral today, and then we'll finish up with humanistic and trait a little bit later. All right, I'm going to skip the video just because we don't have time. All right, so Freud's concept of personality, I think we talked about this when we looked at Freud and talked about the ego versus the id and the superego, right? So Sigmund Freud, he was really the founder of psychoanalytical movement. He looked at what kind of trials and experience, a negative experience a person had, and how that developed into their thinking, their thought process, their how they remember things, how they react to things, development of their personality, how they develop defense mechanisms to help them guard from unpleasant experiences, right? So he developed what we know as the conception of personality in the psychodynamic realm. It happened in the Victorian age, which he believed sexual repression and sex for procreation satisfied men's uncontrollable sexual desires. And that was kind of one of the flaws of his theory that we have identified over the generations, is that his focus was on men, and it was really on the sexual gratification of men. And he eventually branched out into the sexual gratification of women, but sex was really the center focus of his theories, which we know today is no longer the case. So within his structure of the mind, Freud devised, like I said earlier, the ego, the superego, and the id. Okay, so a good way to remember this, I like the iceberg demonstration because it really it really demonstrates what exactly how all these parts work together. So if you remember back, I think it was chapter 4, we talked about consciousness, right? We know that consciousness is what? It's alertness, it's awareness of what's going on around us, how we're interacting with it, and how we're thinking about things in that moment that we're aware of. And then you have this subconscious, this unconscious, below the surface. Things are going on that we're not really quite aware, right? It happens when we have a mood that we can't describe. Like if somebody makes us upset on a certain day, and we carry that mood over. We're not aware of that, but we hold on to that. And that happens in the unconscious, according to Freud's theory of the mind. or structure of the mind, right? And then right in between that conscious and unconscious, you have this pre-consciousness, which is material that's just kind of beneath it. We are aware of it, but we're not aware that we're really broadcasting it. So for example, say many of you were driving to class one day or driving to work, and some jerk in the passing lane cuts you off just to try and get an exit, makes you slam on your brakes extra hard. And you probably had some choice words and gestures for that individual, but for the most part, you may have carried that with you. Okay. And you get to work and you're all rattled because you slam on your brake. You may have had to swerve off into the ditch. And that affected you. You're aware of it. You're aware that it affected you. You're aware that the mood that it put you in, and you know sometimes what you need to do to get out of that. That happens in the pre-conscious area. Okay. Now, if it's unconscious, it could be something that somebody did that you thought about that morning, and it just turned into a mood that you couldn't really put your finger on as to why you're in a bad mood, or maybe you didn't even know you're in a bad mood. Somebody pointed out, hey, why are you being so grumpy today? And you say, oh, I don't know. That would be in the unconscious. All right, so with the ego, superego, and id, are we going to, oh, yeah. Okay. Let me make sure I'm covering what I want to. No, we aren't. Okay, so with the id, or the ego, so the ego is what the expectations, it's what we know is right and wrong, okay? With the id, that's our desires. That's our desires to lash out when we're angry, our desire to jump for joy when we're happy, right? But on the surface, the ego is really where we show people that we're happy. We know whether it's right or wrong. And that happens within the superego. The superego kind of balances between those. It knows what we want to do, and it knows what we're able to do based on what is socially acceptable. So that's kind of just a brief definition of what those three are. So id, again, just focusing on that, that's what's going on below the surface. All right, so Freud looked at the personality, the development of personality, starting at a really young age. And as I explained earlier, he looked at it from a sexual standpoint and what he called his psychosexual stages, or the 5 stages of personality. And he tied this with sexual development. How do we explore the world around us? We usually start like sucking our thumbs or sucking on toys or something, just to kind of get that texture and discover the world, discover tastes and textures and whatever else. So anyway, Freud decided to coin, look at these behaviors as sexual investigations, and he developed the psychosexual stages of development. He looked at fixations, unresolved psychosexual stage conflict. So people that might not be able to progress in fear, overcoming fear, might be stuck in one of those stages of development, which we'll go over here. So his first stage is oral stage. Okay, this happens in the first 18 months, and the focus of this is the mouth. Putting things in the mouth. And if you think about our first experiences, for many of us, we use our mouth to feed, right? So Freud kind of looked at the female, looking at the breast as the first sexual encounter of an infant, right? And again, I'm not condoning any of these theories whatsoever. These are just what he had adopted, and this is kind of what he perpetuated for many decades, because we really didn't have any working models. Then around the 18 to 36 month, the ego develops. Okay, we start learning what's right and wrong, because prior to that, what's happening? What are we doing? Why? What about the anal stage here? Why is that 18 to 36 months? What do we learn to do in 18 to 36 months of our lives? Anybody?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So in response to the term anal, like the anal stage, what are infants learning to do in about 18 to 18 months to 3 years old.
Talk and walk.
Anal, like
Oh.
anus, rear end.
Getting potty trained.
Potty training, right? Toilet training, right? So that's their first introduction as to something that their body wants to do. And parents are saying, no, you can't do that, because prior to that, they can just kind of poop in their diaper and fill their diaper up all they want, and somebody comes along and changes it, right? I mean, oh my gosh, I forgot. I don't think I ever knew that experience, but I don't think I want to. But some children at that age, they're allowed to do that until they get to the age of appropriateness, where they teach them that it's not okay to defecate in your pants, in your clothing. So toilet training is trained, and so that's where they learn when it's okay to expulse themselves, or whether they need to retain it. That, so they learn to control their sphincter muscles, which is holding their feces in until it's appropriate, it's socially appropriate for them to do that. So, and you can kind of see that, like children that are forced to toilet train, that could be a traumatizing experience for them, especially if the parents are authoritative, right? Or I'm sorry, authoritarian. If they're constantly degrading them or making them feel bad, that could teach them inappropriate or inappropriate retentive behaviors. So that would be the second stage. And then the third stage is the phallic stage, which is 3 to 6 years. And this develops with the superego. When the superego develops, that those right or wrong, those feelings of right or wrong, and they start to explore their bodies. They start to realize that they are anatomically different than whatever that opposite sex might be, or they're similar to a same sex, right? So they start exploring differences between boys and girls right around 3 to 6 years old. And then he went into, I'm not going to go into too much details, but the Oedipus and Electra complex, basically how we emotionally attach to one of our parents, okay? Which again, really doesn't hold a lot of merit today. He basically said that girls want to grow up and marry their fathers, and boys want to grow up and marry their mothers, based on Oedipus and Electra from mythology. All right, so right around age 6 to puberty, they start to develop sexual feelings, and Freud described these as repressed same-sex play and developing social skills, right? Which we know we do, right? At that age, we start to, again, further explore what it means to be a boy, or what it means to be a girl. And now we might even be uncovering some points where right around those ages, somewhere in between those ages, they start to develop their gender identity, right? So what they're attracted to, what they're not attracted to, that goes up until about puberty, which we get to the genital stage, according to Freud's psychosexual stages, when puberty happens, and then these sexual feelings, hormones start flooding in, and they begin to consciously express themselves sexually, okay? So anyway, the point in showing you all this is, according to Freud, that any interruption or any kind of trauma or conflict that occurs in any of these 5 stages could have long-lasting effects into an individual's personalities, to the point where they might develop psychological defense mechanisms. And these mechanisms are unconscious distortions of a person's perception of reality that reduce stress and anxiety. And we'll walk through each one of these, okay? And think about, according to Freud, what some of your defense mechanisms might be. One of them is sublimation. So channeling threatening unconscious impulses into socially acceptable actions, okay? So it tends to be productive in nature. So taking some kind of impulse, something that like, say we like to go shopping, Amazon shopping or something like that, which is okay. A lot of people do Amazon shopping, but when you're spending all of your money on Amazon shopping, that's probably not a great thing if you can't pay your bills. So sublimation would be finding, I think they have apps out there that give you the feeling that you're shopping, but what it's actually doing is putting money into savings for you to touch later, right? So that's sublimation. Displacement is channeling impulses to non-threatening objects. Okay. So for example, that jerk that cuts you off while you're riding to school or going to work or whatever. You get to work and a coworker who's maybe a friend of yours comes up and says, "How's your day?" And you take it out on them. Okay. You can maybe just verbally vent to them saying, "Oh, this is absolutely horrible," or "Get away from me," or something like that. Displacement happens when you are taking that mood, taking that experience. And since you can't act on the target of that experience, you act on somebody that that is not a target of that. And that happens a lot we see that happen a lot with, especially domestic violence. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that in practice where one of the couples, usually the male in the relationship, has a bad day at work or is overworked or something like that and comes home and takes it out on the kids or takes it out on the partner or the pet or something. Usually that occurs, and that's what happens with the displacement. Another defense mechanism that we might employ, and you may have heard of this one, is called denial. Usually we see this a lot in addiction, right? Because we have that pride component. We have that, we have to make sense of our world. And if it doesn't make sense, that's a very frightening thing for us. So we engage in denial. We refuse to accept that certain facts exist, right? That pride comes out. It's an extreme form of defense. So why do I say addiction? What happens in addiction that people exhibit denial? Anybody care to take a stab at that?
I actually don't know.
Okay. Anybody? So what does denial look like in addiction? Anybody care to?
I feel like addicts are more likely to say that they aren't addicted to whatever substance, and they, I don't know. It's
Right. They just say, I don't have a problem, right? The problem is you. The problem, you can't lighten up or whatever, you can fill in the blank there. They usually deflect that. I think that's one of them here as well. So they deflect whatever you're throwing at them, and they're denying. They're saying, I don't have an issue. They truly believe that they don't have an issue with substance abuse. Same way with maybe some mental health issues. If they're acting depressed and withdrawn, and they deny that, right? That's denial. But it makes the person seem less realistic when they're in that process. Okay. We see reaction formation. That's another defense mechanism. And pay attention to these, because I believe these are your assignment for this week as well. Reaction formation, acting in a manner opposite to threatening unconscious desires. Somebody said humor, acting goofy, right? We might act a little goofy if somebody gave us some bad news, right? That's reaction formation. That's acting in an opposite manner to a threatening. Now, that's pretty normal. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but when does it turn bad? When somebody's constantly doing that, when they're laughing at bad news, that's not necessarily a good thing or socially acceptable, and it might actually make the people around you a little uncomfortable, right? If you're laughing at horrible news, like you see something bad happen, 100 people were killed on a subway or something, and somebody bursts out in laughter, that might raise
I'm not feeling too well, Professor. My best friend tells me, "Oh, I don't like talking to you anymore because you laugh about everything."
Okay. So that and again, I mean, that's just our way of trying to bounce back. Some people don't want to feel bad, so we use humor to try and raise us up. And done right, employed right, that's an effective strategy. But like in your relationships, if you're making jokes, if your partner is not expecting or receptive to those jokes, that could be, it could be a problem further down the road. So that's, reaction formation. It's, according to Freud, it's something that we do. It's something that we kind of see and with other theories, something similar to this, but for the most part, it is pretty normal. Intellectualization, removing of emotional content from the thought. This helps to bring difficult thoughts into consciousness without anxiety. So we try and rationalize. We go through our head and we intellectualize what it is we're feeling and why we're feeling it. Right. When we're making snap decisions, if we have something that is really, really important and we're doing a pros and cons list instead of how we feel or how we don't feel, we're actually listing the benefits, the benefits and drawbacks to that. That's intellectualization, which again isn't a bad thing unless you're doing it all the time. If somebody comes up and says, "Hey, how do you feel about that game the other day?" and then you just rattle off the stats of everything and not how you feel, that may be off-putting to the other people and not very pro-social. All right, and then you got projection, which is attributing unconscious impulse to others. I get this a lot. It takes a thief to know a thief, right? Maybe some of you have heard that statement before. What does that mean? It takes a thief to know a thief.
If you're a thief, you'll know who is a thief.
Right, because you know who they are, you know how they act, you know how they walk, you know their behaviors, right? How they might come up and introduce themselves. So projection is when we are aware of what we would do and we project that onto other people. So for example, if we are somebody that is insecure and rude enough to do something personal against somebody, like cut them off. If we tend to be crazy drivers or something like that, we might project that onto them. Like if we're having a bad day and we feel like we would cut somebody off if we could, and somebody cuts us off, we don't think of them as being a person. We de-individualize them and we say that they're a horrible person because they are just against me right now. They targeted me. So that's projection. You could have I have some friends and family that are cops, that are police, and they see enough of crime that they project on the world. They think that the world is a terrible place. So they're constantly, just going through those extra measures of protecting their cars, and they've got 2 and 3 alarm systems on their house. That's projection. Okay. And then you have regression, which we're starting to, these last two, let me see if these are the last two. These last two are a little bit contested because regression states that we revert to a younger age, usually immature behavior to ventilate our feelings. So for example, if somebody experiences a death in the family, they might resort to talking in baby talk, and rocking back and forth or sucking their thumb. That has happened, like with certain traumas with some people. We do know that it does occur, but we don't know as though the person actually goes back to that young age. They may have behaviors that are similar to those young ages, but like throwing a temper tantrum or withdrawing or something like that, we can see that as being like an immature behavior, but that doesn't necessarily mean that their mind has gone back to 5 years old or something like that, if that makes sense. So regression, it was one of the things that Freud explained, and that we have kind of said, there might be more to that. Repression is the unconscious blocking of unpleasant emotions, impulses, memories, and thoughts from the conscious mind. This is currently being refuted because we know what the effects of trauma are. In fact, it's the opposite. When trauma happens, something painful happens, usually the person does what with their environment? Do they remember more or do they remember less? What do you think?
Plus,
Do you think they remember less if something traumatic happens?
I think so. I think I hear that people tend to forget things related to their trauma because I forgot how to explain it. Wait, let me explain
okay.
myself again. So I hear and I read somewhere that when you have a trauma about something and you don't have memories about it, it's because that's a trauma response. That's not a trauma response. you tend to forget it because your brain makes like, okay, if D makes you sad or depressed, I'm gonna try to remove it from your memory so you don't get those feelings again. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, it does. And believe it or not, that's a very popular thought about how that happens. For a while, it was a very popular thought in the psychological community, to the point where they thought that maybe things like hypnosis could draw out some of those repressed memories, right? That we can extract them from the depths of our neurons within our brains, our hippocampus, then pull it to the surface so that we can deal with whatever emotional trauma that caused. Because that was the thought that was the concept that Freud had proposed with repression, is that whatever memory that was so painful that we unconsciously locked it away so that it could never be seen or experienced again. And like I said, for a while, that was a popular thought. But recent studies have shown, excuse me, that much the opposite happens. So if somebody experiences something so traumatic and so threatening, our body automatically goes into fight or flight mode, and it starts recording everything. It slows everything down. Our breathing is adjusted. It becomes shallow. Our heart rate goes up. Our bodies get tense. We start taking in everything. Now, why do we do this? From an evolutionary perspective, we do that because we want to be aware of what our surrounding is doing, whether it's a threat or whether we can be easy with it. So believe it or not, our memory is actually sharper because we have that element of surprise, and we're trying to evaluate whether or not this is a good experience or this is a bad experience, or do I need to stick around and be comfortable with it, or should I get the heck out of Dodge so that I don't have to feel like I'm threatened anymore. So repression, I think we've retermed to avoidance, and we do have avoidant personalities, people that don't want to deal with painful things. So they do have that memory. They're just choosing not to bring it up or talk about it because it was too painful for them. So anyway, the idea of repression is, we're currently refuting it because we're finding that evidence doesn't support it. Supports the opposite. When we experience something so traumatic, we actually we remember much more than what we thought. Okay. All right. And
I have
here's
a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was gonna say before that I feel like you remember things more with something traumatic, and then what you said made sense. So it sounds like repression is like extremely unhealthy. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it would be because according to Sigmund Freud's psychodynamic theory here of personality, repression is something that's way down in the id, right? It's something that we experience that we haven't resolved. So it might be some kind of hurt that a caregiver bestowed upon us, or it could be somebody physically hurt us, or whatever, or we feared for our lives. That, according to Freud, that memory resides way down inside the id. It's forgotten, it's untouched, nobody's even tried to deal with it. What we know now is that people do remember that, but they're choosing not to talk about it. They've developed all these layers of behaviors, and it made them who they were or who they are today. So to go back and undo that can be problematic for some people. So anyway, they choose to just not talk about it or how they feel about it. And for the most part, we all kind of do that. If we experience something that's traumatic, we tend to do what? We move on, right? We build our lives back up to what they were, the best that we can, and we try to move on. So repression, it doesn't make a lot of sense as to why that would. Now we could have unresolved conflict, like if we had a parent or caregiver that hurt us that we don't want to talk about, but for some reason in relationships, it's triggering us to act a certain way or become combative or argumentative, then that would be a problem in that relationship. And that would, if we go back to every relationship, we would probably see that same pattern of behavior with that person. So what a therapist would do is identify what that pattern is. Identify, and the person may say, well, that's the relationship that I grew up with my mother or father or parents, mothers and fathers, whatever that relationship might have been, and then working backwards to say, maybe change their perspective to help them see that maybe this was just an isolated case and this is not how everybody relates to you. So anyway, yeah, that's just a little bit on
I
why.
have a question.
Yep, go ahead.
Is all this related to or connected to the 5 stages of grief?
A little bit. In self-defense mechanisms, absolutely. Because if you go back here, because denial, right? We Kubler-Ross model of the grieving process says that denial is part of that, right? We might have displacement, which might be some kind of art or anger, going through the anger, right? Not necessarily regression, but projection. But yeah, there are a couple in there that Kubler-Ross probably used to develop their 5 stages of grief. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. So Neo-Freudian. So after Freud came up with multiple books and theories and traits, there were some people that came after him that said, this is great. However, we don't subscribe to everything being sexualized, right? We don't think that boys want to grow up and marry their mothers, and girls want to grow up and marry their fathers, right? We kind of figured that wasn't going to be the case. So Carl Jung, Adler, Horney, and Erickson, they all developed different types of personality development through their lives. And we're not going to have time to go through each one of them. If you want to go through personality class, I think that's a great way that they do tend to delve into that a little bit more. Okay. All right. So defense mechanisms, we do find support that there are defense mechanisms, and the concept of the unconscious mind can influence conscious behavior. So again, we look at that as mood. If somebody's in a bad mood or has a bad attitude, that bleeds over into further behaviors and actions. Okay. One of the drawbacks to the psychodynamic perspective is that it's very existential. It's very focused on trauma that has occurred or being stuck. It doesn't really explain the healthy mind. It doesn't explain how people develop healthy personalities. It only really focuses on how people develop not social personalities. Okay. And we'll talk about that when we get into some of these other steps. All right. So as for now, I know we didn't get very far. We only got through one of the perspectives of psychodynamic. When we pick up on Wednesday, we'll talk about behavioral and social cognitive view of personality. Any questions for me? All right. If nothing else, I wish all of you a very great day. Enjoy the sunny weather, and I will see all of you back here on Wednesday. Have a great day, everybody.
Dude, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
too.
you.
Yep.
Dr. McMunn, I have something to
Thank
say.
you too.
All right. Go ahead, Michael.
So I'm actually this is like for next week. I'm going on a school trip to Peru.
Oh,
So I won't be able to like attend the Zooms. So
Okay.
I'm leaving this Friday, so I'm gonna try to get everything in before Friday for this week, and then I'll hopefully get everything in before Sunday. I won't have internet, so I won't be able to do like the class
Yeah.
discussion. But
yeah. If you want to, that's fine. Just send me an email. I'll probably grade on Tuesday or Wednesday. If that's a class trip, that's perfectly excusable. But if for whatever reason I get to the grading, when are you going to be back?
so next Saturday.
Next Saturday. Okay. Yeah. So if you get that, if you get everything in, great. If not, just send me a quick email telling me that you're a little bit delayed or whatever, and we'll work with you. Okay.
Okay.
All right. And be safe and enjoy. You're leaving when?
This Friday I'm going to Peru.
Oh, this Friday. So you'll be here on Wednesday. It'll be next week, all next week. Gotcha.
Yeah, all next week.
Okay. All right. Well, good. I hope you have a very nice trip. I hope you come
Yeah.
back with some pictures. I'll let you share them in the class if you want.
All right, we'll do.
All right. All right. Take care, Michael.
You too. Thank you.
Toyan, did you have a question for me?